Hey everybody, welcome to WTF Hammer Underworlds. Moving on to the second warband of my Season 4 warband review series, we have the Dread Pageant, who, while pursuing visions of their missing deity Slanesh, being the sadomasochists as they are, decided to torture people in Beastgrave to basically hold back and deny the mountain's desire for the flesh of its dead victims. As I always do, I'm going to be looking at this warband's fighter cards, their faction-specific cards, that being their objective cards and power cards. Then I'm going to rate these guys, compare them to all the other warbands that I've rated thus far. Starting with the fighter cards, we have a 4-unit warband. Second 4-unit warband to be released for Dire Chasm. There's 3 out already. I'll be reviewing the next one next week. And, these guys are interesting. I'll just say right now that I am going to be having a difficult time rating these guys and placing them because of just how unique their mechanics are. One of those interesting qualities being their Inspire mechanic, in which they all inspire after an activation if surviving fighters in general have 6 or more wound counters accumulated, which definitely is not easy to achieve, definitely is nuanced. Let's just start by looking at the leader, Vasilak the Gifted, who's a pretty solid leader. I mean, not overly exceptional as far as leaders are concerned, but, definitely not subpar. 4 movement going to 5 movement when inspired. Bad defense, just 1 block defense, 4 wounds, pretty solid. Good attack. I mean, the range 2 is nice. 2 hammers doing 2 damage, going up to 3 damage, getting cleave when inspired. And also having an interesting ability to manipulate damage, where after an attack action, he can either do a damage to himself or heal himself by 1, which, plays with their Inspire mechanic, also helps them to recover lost wounds, so pretty cool. Slash being the next unit in this warband who has a similar reaction ability, as good, if not better, than Vasilak is, having 5 wounds, which is really cool, especially considering that he's technically a secondary character. 4 movement going to 5 movement when inspired, and having a pretty good attack. I mean, high accuracy, medium damage, definitely not bad damage. 3 swords, 2 damage uninspired, going to 4 swords or fury, 2 damage when inspired. Also a hunter and a quarry, which cause him to be vulnerable in some sense, but also versatile at the same time. And the last 2 units, definitely the flimsier ones, but not useless. Flimsy, not like Narvia and Turosh useless. We have Hadzu, who's a hunter, who is a ranged attacker, 3 range, 3 swords, 1 damage, going up to 4 range when inspired. And this attack, when successful, allows you to push a target instead of merely just driving them back, which is definitely nice for the whole control aspect. Also goes from 1 dodge to 2 dodge, 4 move to 5 move when inspired. And final unit is Glaceet, who has a nice reach attack just like Vasilak, so 2 range, 2 swords, 2 damage, going up to 3 swords when inspired, and also getting a scything attack, which is pretty reliable, landing on 3 swords doing 1 damage. 4 movement going to 5 movement. Otherwise, the 2 dodge, the 2 wound stays the same. But this fighter is constantly on guard, which is definitely cool, definitely helps her to survive, especially considering she only has 2 wounds. And that basically does it. So let's just summarize the pros and cons of this warband's fighter cards. Pros being that they have special combat abilities. They have cleave, they have scything when inspired, and they have special abilities as well. That whole healing or inflicting thing that Vasilak and Slash have. Arrows of Desire for Hadzu, Glaceet's Guard, definitely nice special abilities. They have range capabilities, so either range 2 or range 3 or range 1, which is a nice variety. The Hunter and Quarry keyword, Hunter on 2 units, Quarry on 1. Pretty good movement, 4 going to 5 in many cases. And that whole 4-unit warband number, which I think is pretty optimal. 5 units also pretty optimal too. Cons, lowish defense. All these units only have 1 defense until inspired, and only 2 of them actually go up to 2 defense. And a risky inspire mechanic, to say the least, where they have to accumulate wounds. Can be difficult. Oftentimes, when I've played these guys or played against them, I typically just try to wipe out Hadzu and Glaceet so they can't accumulate wound tokens, and it makes their inspiring even more difficult. And that basically does it. So let's move on to this warband's objective cards. Starting with their surge cards, we have Endless Revel, worth 1 glory point. Scores immediately after an activation if each surviving friendly fighter has 1 or more move and or charge tokens. So basically requires you to move and charge with all of your dudes. Definitely reliable. I'm giving it an A, just that it might take many actions to actually achieve. Particularly nice late game if you get this and you only have 1 unit left, for example. Excess of Carnality, worth 1 glory point. Score this immediately after an activation if 2 or more friendly fighters are adjacent to the same enemy fighter. So encourages supporting. Also giving that an A because pretty easy to achieve, I think. Excess of Gluttony. Score this immediately after an activation if 1 or more friendly fighters are each adjacent to 2 or more enemy fighters. So a little bit trickier to pull off. Relies more on what your opponent is doing and if they're clustering their own units. So I'm going to give that a B. There's Excess of Vainglory, which is a hybrid. Scores immediately after a friendly fighter's attack action if that attack action takes an enemy fighter with 2 or more upgrades out of action, or that friendly fighter has 3 or more upgrades, so plays with upgrades a little bit, worth 1 glory point. Pretty reliable, I'm giving it an A. And there's Grisly Tableau, worth 1 glory. Scores immediately after a friendly fighter's attack action that takes an enemy fighter holding an objective out of action. So similar to the Blade Coven's objective card, whose name I forget. I'm giving this a B. Quite a few conditions in order to be able to pull this thing off. And that does it for the surges. Score in the end phase. There's Beautiful Death's Duel. Score this in an end phase if there are 3 or more surviving friendly fighters and 3 or more enemy fighters are out of action, worth 6. I'm giving it a B. Definitely not impossible to pull off, but definitely not easy and reliant on good rolls and your enemy's bad rolls and your units don't have the best defense. I'd give it a C if it wasn't for the fact that it was worth so many glory. I mean, if this thing gets pulled off, it's a huge game changer. I just don't expect it to get pulled off too often, unless you're playing like a 3 to 4 player match or something, in which case this thing is just golden. Next is Cavalcade of Madness Duel. Score this in an end phase if there are 3 or more surviving friendly fighters, and each surviving friendly fighter is inspired, worth 2 glory. So tricky. I'm giving that a B. It's nice that these guys inspire all at the same time, but to have 3 of your units still alive by the time the inspiring goes off, considering how challenging their inspire mechanic is, makes this pretty unreliable to achieve. Next is Excess of Avidity. Score this in an end phase if your warband holds more objectives than any other warband, worth 2. I'm giving that an A. I think it's pretty achievable. Obviously depends on the type of warband you're facing, but not unreliable. Next, we have Excess of Indolency. Anyway, hybrid. Score this in end phase if there are no enemy fighters with any move or charge tokens, or your warband holds 2 or more objectives, worth 2 glory. Awesome card. I'm giving this a S. I don't imagine the first hybrid option being played that often unless you're playing against a super passive warband, but holding 2 or more objectives, definitely not hard to pull off and worth 2 glory. Very, very nice. A better version of Supremacy, in my opinion. There's Excess of Paramountcy. Hybrid, worth 1 glory. Scores an end phase if your leader holds an objective in enemy territory, or 1 or more enemy leaders holds an objective in your territory. So nice versatility there. I'm going to give it an A. As long as Vasilak didn't get killed early, this becomes pretty easy to pull off, I think. Especially with this Reach 2, he can usually go onto an objective and still make an attack. Godseeker is worth 2 glory. Scores an end phase if each surviving friendly fighter is in enemy territory, worth 2. Also very nice, giving this an A. Something that is definitely controllable from the perspective of a player playing these guys. And finally, Scintillating Sadism, worth 2 glory. Scores an end phase if each surviving enemy fighter has 1 or more wound counter. So a little bit tricky to pull off. Requires you to sort of ping enemies, which typically isn't ideal, seeing as generally you want to kill units and collect glory, but in these guys' cases, it's pretty useful since you need them to be wounded in order to inspire. I'm giving it a B, could be worth an A. And that does it for the objective cards, which typically promote using all friendly fighters, getting adjacent to enemies, harming multiple enemies, equipping upgrades, accumulating damage, holding objective tokens, and entering enemy territory. Moving on to the power cards, we will start with the Gambits, which are all ploys since there's no spellcaster. There's Bonded Bodyguard, which is restricted to Slack-a-Slash. Reaction. After another fighter's move action, if that fighter is not adjacent to a friendly Slack-a-Slash, push a friendly Slack-a-Slash up to 2 hexes. After the push, that Slack-a-Slash must be no more than 2 hexes from a friendly Vasilak. Nice way of pushing Slack-a-Slash in a way that's kind of restricting, but it's still pretty decent. I'm giving this an A. There's Cruel Pangs. Choose 1 fighter holding an objective, deal 1 damage to that fighter. Also giving it an A, just a guaranteed damage, generally speaking, at some point during the game. Also helps to inspire. Next is Dark Desires. Choose 1 enemy fighter. The chosen fighter player must pick 1. Give that fighter 1 move token or push that fighter 1 hex. Pretty good. Transfixing Stare or Distraction. The enemy gets to choose. I'm going to give it an A. Next up, we have Deadly Embrace, which is a reaction. Play this during an enemy fighter's range 1 or range 2 attack action that targets a friendly fighter. After the deal damage step, if the friendly fighter has been dealt enough damage to take them out of action, roll a magic dice on a channel that friendly fighter makes an attack action that must target the attacker. So basically like a last stand kind of a swing of last lunge. I'm giving it a B, mostly because it relies on a 50% roll before the attack action is actually made, which itself is based in chance, so not likely for this card to be successful. There's Enervating Perfume, restricted to Vasilak, a -1 damage from the first attack action made in the next activation. So, I mean, an okay damage reduction card that only applies once. Not a huge fan of it, though, giving it a B, since the enemy could do something else, and that -1 is not as significant as other cards, which reduce damage to 1. There's Fueled by Sensation. Choose one friendly fighter, pick one, heal 1 to that fighter, or deal 1 damage to that fighter. Pretty cool. Heal or damage, help inspire. Plays with that damage manipulation mechanic. I'm going to give it a B. There's the Lure of Slanesh. Choose one fighter, push the chosen fighter 1 hex or up to 1 hex for each surviving friendly fighter with 1 or more wound counters. So a sidestep on crack. I'm going to give it an S. Very nice. Next is Rush of Sensation. As a reaction, play this after a friendly fighter's attack action that takes an enemy fighter out of action. That friendly fighter makes 1 move action. So a nice movement ploy. I'm going to give it a B, mostly because of the fact that it's so circumstantial. There is Shared Pain, which as a reaction, play this during an enemy fighter's attack action that targets a friendly fighter. After the Determined Success step, when resolving the Deal Damage step, choose one friendly fighter within 3 hexes of the target. That fighter, rather than the target, is dealt the damage from the attack action, then the combat sequence ends. Nice way to mitigate damage. Slackish Slash or Vasilak could take the damage, for example, which could trigger Inspire while saving Hadzu or Glaceet. Pretty nice card. I'm going to give it an A. There's Vicious Barbs. Choose one enemy fighter adjacent to 1 or more friendly fighters. The chosen fighter is uninspired and cannot be inspired. This effect persists until the end of the round or until that fighter is taken out of action. When this effect ends, the chosen fighter is inspired. So sort of a temporary uninspire, but then guarantees they're inspired afterward if they weren't inspired already. So I'm going to give it a B. Definitely not as great as the Thorns or Mollog card that guarantees uninspiring for the rest of the game, even if they haven't been inspired already. This is definitely a lower tier version of that. And that does it for the ploys, which promote pushing fighters, impairing enemy movement, healing or damaging friendly fighters, controlling damage, damaging enemy fighters, an out-of-turn attack action, reducing damage, moving friendly fighters, and uninspiring enemies. And finally, we're going to move on to the upgrades, starting with Cruel Volley, which is restricted to Hadzu. As a reaction after this fighter's first range 3 attack action in a round, this fighter makes a second range 3 attack action. So definitely a nice ability. I guess I'll give it an A because he has the ability to push people instead of driving them back. So being able to do that twice is pretty powerful, but he is also low wounds, low defense until inspired. Typically not the ideal target of upgrades. There is Dance Without End, restricted to Glaceet. As a reaction after another friendly fighter's move action, push this fighter 1 hex or 2 hexes if you first deal 1 damage to this fighter. So this allows Glaceet to be a bit more mobile. I'm going to give it a B. Distracting Ostentation, -1 dice from attack actions made by enemy fighters adjacent to this fighter. So awesome card. I'm giving that an A. Could be worth an S. For Lady Harrow, who has a similar card, I gave an S, but that's mostly because she has an inherent ability to just get pushed around, which allows her to really position herself well on a consistent basis to give people the -1 to their attack actions. This warband doesn't have that, but it's still a good card. There's Mark of the Dark Prince, restricted to Slackish Slash. As a reaction during this fighter's range 1 attack action before the attack roll, deal 1 damage to this fighter. Choose Cleave or Ensnare. The attack action has that ability until it has been resolved. So take a damage, get Cleave or Ensnare. Nice and versatile, although you do take damage to use it. I'm giving it an A because he can heal up right afterwards if you wanted to. Next is Sadistic Goad. Range 2, 3 swords, varying damage. Damage being able to 1 plus the number of the target's wounds counters. So if you're attacking something that has 1 or 2 or 3 wounds and it's still alive, it could do more. So definitely good against Mollog or Hrothgorn or other really tough units, but not very useful against weaker units or undamaged units. Giving A though because it could be very powerful if used properly. There's Sickening Resilience. When this fighter is dealt damage, roll 1 defense dice. On a roll of shield, this fighter is only dealt 1 damage. So super amazing defense card. I'm giving this an S. There's Soporific Musk. Enemy fighters that begin a move action within 2 hexes of this fighter have -1 move. So nice movement impair. Goes nice with the accuracy impair. I'm going to give this an A. Their strength from pain. +1 damage to this fighter's range 1 or range 2 attack actions if the target has 1 or more wound counters. So conditional great strength. I'm giving it an A though because these guys are likely to have damage on their fighter cards. There's swift as desire. +1 move or +2 move if they have 1 or more wound counters. So give it an A as well. And finally, the Sword Shatterer. As a reaction after a range 1 or 2 attack action which targets this fighter, roll an attack dice. On a roll of hammer, pick one of the attacker's upgrades. That card is discarded. So pretty nice way to screw over the enemy's upgrades. I'm going to give it an A. And that basically does it for all these cards. Upgrades promote pushing friendly fighters, an out-of-turn attack action, improving attack accuracy, impairing enemy attack accuracy, manipulating damage, improving movement, discarding enemy upgrades, and a couple exceptional weapon upgrades. And here's the big picture. So objectives, gambits, upgrades, as you can see, each of them have one S tier, so an auto include, and many, many A tier upgrades especially. So solid cards, generally speaking, many, many options worth adding to a deck with universal cards from all the card types. So just good. And that basically does it. Now I'm going to rate this warband and compare it to all the other ones I have rated thus far. So here's my summary. These guys have risky and tricky inspire mechanic, but there are a lot of mechanics to help them achieve their inspiration, as well as to heal from the lost wounds, which is nice, helps make them more durable. They have solid objective cards, which promote a thematic variety of practical aggression and positional play. And they do have that interesting ability to manipulate damage, healing, and damaging themselves, which can facilitate their own inspiring and access to abilities, as well as to heal lost wounds. So that's just cool at the very least. And generally solid fighters. I mean, Slack-a-Slash and Vasilak are great, Slack-a-Slash especially. Even Hadzu and Glisset have interesting mechanics, even though they have 2 wounds, they're not useless 2-wound units. So overall, I decided to rate this warband as an A, and this is where I put it in the overall scheme of things. And this was tricky. I decided to place it just above Miari's Purifiers, behind Ripa's. I still think Ripa's is better than both of these 2 Dire Chasm warbands. And it was hard to make the decision. I mean, I can see arguments in favor of putting the Dread Pageant behind Miari's as well. But I think overall these guys have more versatility, more interesting mechanics, higher movement, more potential damage. They're not as squishy. They don't all have 3 wounds like Miari's. When I thought of all these together, I just thought that they were superior, but I still don't think they are as reliable or as solid as Ripa's Snarlfangs, but not by a lot. But I will say, a big congrats to Games Workshop for releasing 2 warbands right next to each other, which are probably closest in tier that any of these other warbands are. So nice job in balancing efforts. And that basically does it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you guys have any thoughts or suggestions, please comment below. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. And next week, I'm going to be looking at Kagra's Ravagers. Thanks again for watching, and have a nice day.